Today's guest says that the Fed is losing control of what is happening right now in our market, in our economy, and most specifically with inflation from all of this money printing that we've seen. So what does it mean that they're losing control? How does it affect you, your freedoms, your future, your money, your retirement? And what are the best ways you can prepare yourself? That's what we're going to be discussing today with Mark Moss. Now, every couple months, Mark does a live online event where he breaks down everything happening in the markets, investing, the best things to be buying, selling, and what to be looking out for. His next live event is coming up in just a couple days, really diving into how the Fed is losing control, how this affects you, and what you can do about it. So the link to sign up is free. It's right there down below. They're always fantastic. Right there down below in the description. And it's pinned as the first comment right there down below. It's live online coming up in just a couple days. So go ahead and check that out right there down below. And make sure you hit the like button on this video. Send it out in the YouTube universe so more people see it. Subscribe and bell notification. Give us a comment down below. This is Mark Rules right there down below. And it's good to see you, Mark.
Yeah, Jake, thanks so much for that intro. Love catching up and love seeing you again. So great to be here.
Okay, so the Fed is losing control. That seems to be the exact opposite of, for the last 10 years, what everyone's been saying. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I think, from the first part, like control of what, right? So the Fed is driving the market. And so the Fed thinks that the market is like a machine that they could build and they could control. The reality is the market is made of 330 million Americans that are humans and 7.8 billion people that are humans, and we are irrational, and our wants, needs, and desires are constantly changing. And like, I love vanilla ice cream, but today I just want chocolate, and I don't know why. Like, I used to want baggy jeans and now I want skinny jeans. I don't know why. And so we're always changing our wants and desires. So the market is made up of living people. It's like an organic market. And so they think that they can control it like an engine, but the reality is they can't, because it's made up of people. And so they have, set these policies in place. Really, their two tools are, monetary supply, increasing the monetary supply, and interest rates. And they think they can control everything with those tools. And their mandates have been full employment and stable inflation. Now they're going to fix climate change and racial and income inequality and all these things with their two tools that they have. So they think they can control these things. They've been trying to control these things. And now I believe the market is out of control and they don't have control of it anymore.
It's so bizarre to watch them talk about how somehow the Federal Reserve is going to deal with climate change or racism or whatever other types of things that have nothing to do with printing money that they somehow say they're going to fix. I look at it and I go, what on earth are they talking about? What are they talking about? I mean, I look at it and I go, why doesn't everyone just stop and go, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, I think there's the saying, right? When all you have is a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. And so all they have is money. And so they'll just use money to fix everything. The income inequality specifically is the funny part, because they're the ones creating that. There's a great website that I reference all the time. WTF happened in 1971. And it's just a whole website full of just charts and graphs that show what happened since we've left the gold standard and the Fed is runaway printing. And everything from the divorce rate to the incarceration rate to the homelessness rate to the income inequality. And so now they're going to fix that somehow, a problem they created. But really, it comes down to how can they use money. So we'll just print money and give it to the people that don't have as much. But I guess all these things have unintended consequences. And so at the end of the day, they're just getting the problems worse and worse and worse.
So explain how they've caused it. You said that statement, then you referenced the WTF 1971 and all these social issues that arose. What do you mean by that? Let's dive into that a little more.
Well, so from a super simple standpoint, right? The Federal Reserve, as I said, they can really, what they can do is they can affect interest rates, and they can increase or decrease the monetary supply. And so if you think about inflation, like they're inflating a balloon, like the balloon has money, they're inflating it with money, with the monetary supply. But every time they create another dollar, all the existing dollars are worth less. And so people think that homes are going up in value, or gold's going up in value, or Bitcoin's going up in value, whatever. But the reality is, it's the dollars are losing value, and so it's taking more dollars to buy those things today. So that's it from a very standpoint. So what happens is, it's pushing asset prices up. Homes are going up, stocks are going up, gold is going up, etc. But the dollars are buying less at the same time. So for people that own assets, the really rich, they own assets, they're seeing their assets going up in value. But for most of the people who are working for wages, they're seeing their wages buy less and less and less. And so it creates that income, that divide, that inequality divide. And so, it used to take about 23 weeks out of your life to have the American dream. One family member working, a house, a car, college education, et cetera, about 23 weeks. Today, it's about 53 weeks. So there's only 52 weeks in a year. So that's a problem. And so these people aren't able to get ahead. And so we've seen, when you adjust for inflation, that real wages have actually gone down since the 70s. People are actually making less in terms of their purchasing power. In the meantime, the rich who own the assets are seeing their assets boosted sky high. So that's the first part of it. So it's really difficult to get ahead when you're working for wages, but when you own assets, you see them go up. Since the pandemic broke out, we've seen the top 1%, top 10% gain almost all the wealth because they own all the assets. And so the assets go sky high. The other thing, so that's part one. The other part two is something known as the Cantillon effect. And so what that means is, whoever's closest to the money supply benefits the most. So the central bank creates money basically out of thin air, and they create reserves. They give the reserves to the banks. Those banks get the money for free, and they should be loaning it out to you and I. That's how the money gets created into existence. But what they have done since 2008 is not loan as much out, and they just buy assets. So they're getting near free money, buying assets and pushing the assets sky high. Then it goes to their buddies next, the hedge funds, institutions, things like that get it at 1% interest, and they push assets up even higher. And by the time it gets to you and I, the asset prices are sky high, and we're paying 8% on the money. Now, we can see this really, really good example today. It's been all over the news. I did a video on this, of BlackRock and other Wall Street hedge funds buying up all the single family homes across the country. And I did a video on this, and basically the entry level 3-bedroom, 2-bath that young families are supposed to buy, that really have been the bedrock of America, where people have ownership. Well, now all the hedge funds are buying them up. And as a matter of fact, not only buying them up, they're buying entire tracts, and they're paying sometimes over 30% over the value. Well, how can they do that, and why can they do that? And when I made the video, I got all these comments: that should be illegal. We need laws to make that illegal. Well, no, it's the problem of the Fed and the money printer. The Fed is giving those funds money at near free, 1% interest, 0.5% interest, and they're going and buying all the single families home, and they can pay over what a normal investor could. I need to make 4 or 5% on my money because I'm paying 4 or 5% interest. Well, they're getting the money for free. And so that's another example of how it really creates this big problem.
Yeah, I like this because that's what has to happen. I feel like everyone needs to realize, regardless of your political affiliation, that the problems that you want solved based off of your political views, as probably a normal, good, hardworking person, and you rightfully want certain problems solved, and that influences whatever side of the political spectrum you're on. But as you're saying, in many instances, these problems are actually caused by the monetary system itself. And so it's only making these problems continue to magnify more and more and more. That's essentially what you're saying.
Yeah, and really, I would say this is a nonpartisan issue because
Yes.
the Democrats might want to spend $2 trillion, and the Republicans might hold it to $1.5 trillion. But either party is going to continue to spend more money, and so really, whichever side of the aisle you're on, it doesn't really matter in regards to this. As you just highlighted, the problem is the monetary system itself. And so we live, our monetary system that we have today is a debt-based system. And so as I kind of highlighted a second ago, the Fed creates reserves to the banks. And when the banks loan out that money, it creates the money into the system. So when I buy a car, RV, house, whatever, that's what creates the money. And so it's all debt. And what happens with debt is leverage. And so if I can get loans to go buy 10 houses and you can get loans to go buy 10 houses and 3 apartment buildings, the economy grows really fast. But when credit dries up, the economy shrinks equally as fast. But we're on this debt-based system. And so that's at the root of it. The money printer itself is the root of all the problems. And so if we had this giant tree and we had this oak tree with 10,000 leaves, and every leaf is a problem in society, at the base of that tree is the money printer. And that's what creates all the problems.
And you're saying the really sinister dynamic of it is that they're getting this money basically for free, and they're supposed to be lending it out to your average ordinary person. But instead, they're taking that free money and they're buying assets with it, which first of all makes them incredibly rich. But second of all, prices your average person out of the contest if they ever want to get into it. And that's basically what's happening as a domino effect. I was kind of thinking about this the other day. I was talking about it in a video, how the Great Reset is really using money printing and inflation to reset who owns the assets in the world. And it's already basically a 99-1, but it's going to be a 99.9999999 to 1.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Well, yeah. And so a lot of people ask, like, how does that happen? Like 2030, you'll own nothing and be happy. How do we own nothing, right? And so what I just described of how Wall Street is now buying up all the single family homes is a great example. So using the money printer, they give the money to their crony friends who then go buy all the homes at 30% over value, which you and I can't compete with. So that's step one. Well, what if I do want to compete with that? Well, then the banks just take away the ability to borrow money. So we saw a couple of days ago, Wells Fargo made big news that they're going to cancel personal credit lines. So the Fed gives the money to the Wall Street funds who go buy up all the houses. And at the same time, they cut off our ability to even get loans.
So what does that mean? When they say, right, I've seen all those headlines, Wells Fargo cutting off personal credit. What does it mean to you and I? Like, what does that actually mean? Like, literally, they won't loan money to anybody? Is that what it means?
Well, it wasn't as extreme as that. To me, this is like a tip of the iceberg type of event. Okay. So this event on its own isn't catastrophic, but it's the canary in the coal mine. It's the crack in the dam, so to speak, right? And so what they've done is they've canceled personal credit lines. They're still doing loans, but the credit lines have been cut back. And again, I think it's the tip of the iceberg. So we've already seen that banks haven't been doing as much lending. The demand for loans have gone down. The amount of loans have gone down. And now they're actively cutting out their loan programs. Like I said, this by itself isn't the end of the world. But when you look at this with some other data points that we'll get into in a second, if you want, what happened with the repo market, now the reverse repo market, when you start adding all these things up, they start telling a different picture.
Yeah, I wish people could I like this conversation because it's so sinister what's happening, especially when both political sides swear that it's just a distraction from what's happening. All these social issues just continue to perpetuate from this money printing, and people get poorer and poorer and poorer and poorer. Crime goes up, right? This cycle continues. And people, of course, then you have stress at incredible record levels. We know stress is the number one cause of illness. So you see how it all ties in together.
It goes even deeper into other areas that people don't realize. So, for example, how did the U.S. government how were they able to lock everybody down and shut everybody's business down and just wipe everybody out, and then just print a few $1 trillion and stimulate the economy? If they didn't have the money printer,
none of that would do it.
none of that would have been
Saved
possible.
us with the fiat system itself.
Yeah. How did they do Operation whatever it was, vaccine warp speed or whatever, and like get that going? And now they're pushing that on every American. It was the money printer. Without the money printer, none of that would have been possible. And we can go back and look at whatever's being taught in the universities. I don't know if you want to jump into that, but whatever's being taught in the universities. Well, how does that, the CRT, how does that take off? Oh, the money printer, right? We can afford to pay all these think tanks to sit there and come up with these crazy ideas all day and then inject. Like, if you look at other countries that don't have money printers, you don't see any of that stuff happening. And so everything stems from that ability to just print endless amounts of money.
That's amazing. Kind of it almost gives me the chills a little bit, right? Because you see how this entire system that essentially keeps not only the majority of people down, but pitted up against one another, wrongfully so. And then it deteriorates our social environment, which we're starting to see now as well.
Yeah.
And so I really like this. So I have a couple things that I have on my notes. I mean, one of them was about the reverse repo, and the other, kind of as we're talking as a whole, is how all of this money printing and these lockdowns and all of this has affected food. You did a video recently about the Great Reset of food. Which do you think would be a better place to go for now?
Well, I think the the Great Reset of food kind of ties in a little bit in a sense, because what's been happening with the food is, again, I believe a problem or a symptom of a problem of the money printer, in a sense, where what we've seen is a consolidation of all of farmland. Mm-hmm. I did a video on this, and you probably touched on it as well, where Bill Gates became the largest farmland owner in the United States. And so they've consolidated all the farmland. And now
he's growing GMO potatoes for McDonald's. That's what he's doing with it. I mean, that just came out pretty recently. I'm like, of course he is.
Of course he's growing GMO food. And then what they've done is they've consolidated all the meat packing. So 85% of all the meat in the United States comes from only 4 meat packers.
Wow.
And so what they do is, if you understand that they want to push for equality of an outcome, which is never going to be possible. First of all, because we're all different in the beginning. But second of all, you could have twins that are raised by the same family, the same neighborhood, the same school, the same everything, given everything exactly the same, but they'll still end up different. And the reason why is because the choices they make growing up are different. And so if you want everyone to have the same outcome, then what you have to do is you have to make sure they have the same choices. And so how do you do that? Well, you limit the amount of choices they're given. And so if I can consolidate down to only 4 meat packers, then it's much easier for me to control what those 4 meat packers are doing. And they've consolidated down to 4 meat packers. And now those 4 meat packers are all heavily invested into synthetic beef, as Bill Gates is invested into all the synthetic beef companies. Now, the reason why I know you're into health, and the reason why they don't want us to know about natural health and natural immunity is because they can't make money from that. Cannabis is magical. A lot of people think that, but they can't make money, so they'll come up with synthetic versions of cannabis, right? Don't take vitamins. You need this synthetic thing, right? And so don't eat beef. How about synthetic beef, right? That comes from soy and potato starch, back to potatoes, et cetera.
Have you seen Bill Gates' pecs though? I mean, it looks like that synthetic meat works pretty damn well, right? He's looking pretty jacked recently.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he's famous for eating his McDonald's and drinking his soda, but yeah, if you saw a picture of him, and you would just be like, why would I go down to the homeless camp and ask them for investment advice?
Yeah, you're kind of basically looking at it, and you're a person that's growing GMO. Anyways, let's first of all, 80% of all meat comes from 4 packagers. So my thought is, as we tie into this Great Reset, we've had the World Economic Forum preparing for a grid down. I mean, once that much of food is concentrated into that small of a group, that could have supply chain issues, and how does supply chains, not just for meat, but in general, we're seeing some of the effects of that, which seem to be a symptom of deteriorating currencies that happen in many socialist countries as supply chains kind of fall apart. How does that all kind of tie together?
Well, I think this is again the symptom of the money printer, right? So again, the money printer goes out to these giant, starts with the banks and it goes to the institutions, the hedge funds, et cetera. And so then what do they do with it? Well, they're getting it for almost free. They're willing to like throw it almost anywhere they could make more than a little bit, more than free. And so they're consolidating everything they can, right? So private equity is rolling up every industry. I have a friend who recently sold his veterinary practice to a private equity group that's rolling up veterinary practices, right?
What?
My other buddy had a medical device repair company and he sold it to companies that private equities that are rolling up medical device manufacturers because they're getting money almost for free. And so they're rolling up farms, they're rolling up meat packing places. And again, none of that would be possible if we weren't creating money for free, if we weren't distorting all those prices. And so I think that just really highlights again the problems that we face when we have this money printer and unlimited money supply that's going unfairly to different people. And I think that's at the end of the day why I'm not really so concerned with the income inequality in a sense where Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world. But guess what? We both use an iPhone. We both have a flat screen TV. We both have a house. We both have a car, right? Like I still get 3 meals a day. Like on a consumption level, him and I live about similar lives, even though he's the richest man in the world or whatever, right? So on a consumption level, everyone in the United States has an iPhone and a flat screen TV and eats 3 meals a day. So on a consumption level, we're all there, but the system itself is unfair. And I think that's at the root of the problem.
So then where do we go? Where do we go from here?
Well, the problem is that this thing is just getting so far out of control. So actually next month will be the 50th anniversary of getting off the gold standard.
Wow.
So we had a sound money, which kind of kept the government in check a little bit. They obviously were printing more, which is why the whole thing failed. But it at least kept them a little bit in check. And so 1971, Richard Nixon removed us from the gold standard. So really all the problems, and I know you cover gold a lot, right? So gold had sat at $20 an ounce for hundreds of years. 1933, when they repossessed the gold or they made it owning it illegal, they revalued it at 35, and then it sat there until 1971. So basically, for hundreds of years up to 1971, gold stayed at about $35 an ounce. Today, it's at almost 2,000 in 50 years after hundreds of years of never moving. And so we've created hundreds of trillions of dollars of debt. The Fed, as I started out earlier, they have kind of two tools, which is interest rates and money printing. Interest rates are at zero or negative in half of the governments around the world. So they can't really go much further with that. So they just have money printing left. We have hundreds of trillions of dollars of debt, and they can't really go more with that. And the problem is that we're stuck in right now, and this kind of goes to this inflation conversation, is that now they're kind of stuck in this rock and a hard place, because if they don't keep pumping out stimulus, first it was QE, now the system needs stimulus to stay alive. If they don't keep pumping that out, everything crashes. But the other side is that the more they pump out, the more inflation goes up, the more asset prices go up, but also consumer goods and services. In Puerto Rico, where I've been living this year, just since January, home prices in my area have doubled 100% in 6 months. In Southern California, where I'm from, in the beach community that I live, prices have doubled in about 2 years. So about 50% a year. Gas is up about 100% in 6 months. And we can go on and on and on. The median home price is up 25% in 12 months. And so that's a symptom of them printing too much money. So if they keep printing, inflation just keeps shooting up higher. If they stop printing, then the whole system crashes.
Yeah, and then at that point, you probably get a real insurrection if the whole thing crashes. There's too many people at this point that they've created too much of a dependence. So the
insurrection is actually an interesting point. I wouldn't necessarily use that word, but I would just say populist uprising or something like that, or civil unrest is probably a better word. And I recently did a 3-part video series where I talked about 3 revolutionary cycles that are all converging at the same time: a financial, a technological, and a political, social, cultural. And so every 84 years, there's a populist uprising or regime change. So 84 years ago was World War II, Mussolini, Hitler, FDR with the New Deal, which kind of turned the United States into socialism. 84 years before that was Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto, which led to the European Spring, which is the largest revolution. Three 84-year cycles. So 3 times 84 equals 252. And every 250 years, we have a revolution. So 250 years ago was the American and French Revolution. 250 years before that was the Protestant Reformation. And each one of those is rejecting globalism or centralization and moving into decentralization. So in the American Revolution, we rejected the monarchy, the centralization of the monarchy. We created a decentralized government. The United States is set up as a republic. And right now, we're in that, the 250-year revolution cycle and is hitting right now. And we're seeing it, right? We're seeing pre-pandemic, there was 10 countries with over 1 million people each marching. And so that civil unrest is something that they're trying to fight with every fiber of their being. It seems like on one side, they're almost stoking it.
They're trying to stoke it against both sides, but when it really falls apart is when the anger gets directed back at them as opposed to opposing groups.
Yeah.
And that's when I think it gets interesting.
Yeah.
Right. Because
That's
like we're kind of seeing that in Cuba right now. Twitter's gaslighting it by saying they're whatever they're saying the cause is. But in reality, you're seeing the largest, they're all going together and they're all focused at the communist regime. And, I think once it gets bad enough for people, there is a point where they put down their arms at one another and it gets rightfully directed. And I guess that's kind of what
where that point is, the breaking point. So we can look at like the Arab Spring. I mean, you can go back anywhere in history and just look at this. The point is when people can't afford to live anymore, when they can't eat. And so that's a big problem. In China, they have a massive problem right now because in the 80s, they put a one-child policy in. So they could only have one child. And so everybody wanted a boy. Everybody wants to have a boy to help them live and pass on the lineage, et cetera. And from 1980 till they repealed it, recently, the last decade, when they would deliver babies, they'd keep a bucket of water next to the bed. And if a girl came out, you know what happened? It's estimated 20 to 30 million baby girls were terminated during that time. Jeez. The problem is now is they have 100 million boys that are aged 20, 30, 40 years old with no girls. And that's not a good recipe. No families.
Well, they'll probably just put Elon Musk's brain implant into them and turn them into half drone army soldiers or something like that.
Yeah. But it's just more civil unrest, and so that's where the countries are at right now, and it's a big problem. And so back to the United States and the inflation, I mean, we have a massive problem. Prices are getting so expensive, people can't afford to live.
And that's why the Fed losing control is so significant, because there's so many social instability ramifications. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and back to the Fed's losing control. The point is they're basically stuck now. They're out of options. The inflation is starting to run away. And if they try to taper down, the whole system crashes. But if they keep going, prices go so sky high, no one can afford anything. And then the civil unrest happens. And so they've lost control. They're out of options.
Okay. So first, if you're still listening here and you haven't signed up yet, this is really enjoyed today's conversation. So if you're still listening, make sure you sign up to Mark's free online event where he really breaks down in more depth how they're losing control and how to best prepare yourselves with investments, with finances, with your mindset. That's linked right there down below in the description and comments. Go ahead and sign up for that for free right there down below. And I think this is a really compelling conversation. So then I think the next question then is, it's obvious they know they're losing control, right? They know it. I did a video yesterday where all I did is post different clips of them talking every 6 to 12 months about inflation. And it starts at like, there's none of it's happening. If anything, it's the opposite to, yes, it is happening and it's good for you. So the shift there, they know it's occurring. So what do you think they're going to do? Do they try to pull the plug in periods to try to stop inflation from getting away and then just keep reflating? Or do they just keep pumping money right now? What do you suspect they're going to do moving forward?
Well, I mean, you've kind of laid out their options pretty well, right? Another big crack that we have is in September 2019, we had the repo market was a big problem. Today, we're seeing a reverse repo problem, kind of the same problem, but it's just showing up. It's the dam is breaking, but now instead of the crack being here, the crack's over there, and it's kind of again piling on to their problems. I would say that they didn't, between the Fed and the government, between monetary and fiscal stimulus in the last, 14 months, we saw about $8 trillion were created, about somewhere between, 30-35% of all dollars in existence today were created in that period. And I just think that they didn't do all that to let it crash now, right? Like they didn't do all that to let it crash now. So I think they keep going. Yeah. And I think they keep, the pedal to the metal until they blow. The problem is the Fed does monetary stimulus. So monetary stimulus is they give money to the banks. The government, the Treasury, gives fiscal stimulus, which gives money to the people. So we've had monetary stimulus, quantitative easing, happening since 2008, since the 2008 financial crash. That money goes to the banks, and then the banks are supposed to lend it into existence. They haven't been doing it. We've seen asset prices go sky high. What we saw last year was we saw stimmy, and the stimmy is from the Treasury going to the people. That's fiscal stimulus. And that creates inflation in consumer goods and services. So the Fed creates inflation in asset prices, real estate, gold, things like that. But the Fed stimulus, the fiscal stimulus, the stimmy creates goods and prices going up. And so the problem that we have is that Biden came in super hot. The Biden admin came in super hot, and they wanted 1.9 trillion for this. And they started talking about this infrastructure bill, another 4 trillion for this. And like, man, all of a sudden they're racking up another $12 trillion. Like, what the heck? Like, inflation is going to go to the moon. I did say it's kind of a nonpartisan thing, but it looks like the Republicans and even some of the Democrats are now not voting to continue with that massive stimulus spending. And so if we get that gridlock and they vote to not continue with that fiscal stimulus when we're addicted to it now, I think that creates a big problem. So that's definitely something to watch. So again, the Fed, they don't really have to deal with the Senate. They can just keep pumping monetary stimulus. But monetary stimulus has kind of run its course. Now we need fiscal stimulus. We need the stimmy for the people to keep things going. And so that's what I'm really keeping my eye on. So where does it go? I think the Fed would go till they blow. I think that we have politicians in office that might try to restrict that. And even just the battle over that could be enough. I mean, we're in such dangerous ground that even just the battle of that or the hint that it may not continue is bad enough to shake the market. So let me give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, or for the last year, the Fed has been saying, we're not even thinking about raising rates. Not even thinking about. They came out a few weeks ago and Jerome Powell said, we're thinking about it. So we went from not thinking about it to now thinking about it. And just that alone was enough to crash the markets. Not crash, but to pull them back. And so that's how, and he said, we're thinking about maybe at the end of 2023, 2 years away. And that was enough to have a knee-jerk reaction in the markets. And so you can see how fragile it is. And if they started fighting over no more stimmy, it could be bad.
Yeah, imagine if you said you were thinking about getting a gym membership 3 years from now. I mean, like it was bizarre to watch that and watch people's reaction. I wonder though, if they're just saying that to try to talk the markets down a little, since we're void of natural free market corrections and price discovery. That maybe that's their other tool in their tool belt. They're like, look, we can't get true price discovery. We can't settle things down. So we'll just make stuff up every few months just to calm it down.
Yeah,
for a little.
I think that's exactly what they did. They didn't do anything other than said something. And then after that, then Jerome Powell went on to, I think, 16 other talks walking that back.
Yep.
So then not only did he say that, then he went and walked it back like 16 times. But it was kind of like, it wasn't pumping the brakes. It was like lifting off the gas for 1 second.
Yeah, that's what, that's kind of the way I was looking at it. So, all right. So, you said that you believe that they'll probably put the pedal to the metal until, you said, quote, until we blow. what does blowing look like? Pedal to the metal till we blow. Nobody knows for sure, but what's your best guess on what that looks like?
Well, I think what that means for me is that what happens, and this is like Keynesian economics, which is what our system is that in times of depression or in deflation, the Fed or the government, the central bank, should print more money, take on debt to stimulate the economy to grow us out of that little depression. And so what happens is, let's say we lost $1 trillion from the economy, they would hope to spend about 500 billion, half that amount, in debt to get that $1 trillion of growth back. The problem is known as the Keynesian multipliers. Once a nation gets over 90% debt to GDP, they're not getting enough growth from the debt they take on. Once you get over 90% debt to GDP, that's kind of like the point of no return. The United States is about 135% debt to GDP.
So it's almost like building a tolerance to a substance. Basically, you stop getting the actual benefits.
Yeah.
From
well, it's all through life. I know you're really into this kind of stuff, and all through life, it's known as diminishing returns. The law of diminishing returns. A little bit is good. Eventually, more doesn't do good, and eventually, more is actually bad. And so that's kind of what it is. A little bit could be good. We're at the point now where more is bad, and the reason why is because we're not getting enough growth for the debt, and now, so we're not getting enough growth for the debt. So now we're just adding up debt faster than we're growing out of it.
So I look at this all and I go, I think we've had a pretty interesting conversation. You've kind of set the scene for what happens socially, as what causes society to deteriorate as they print more and more of this money. And then simultaneously they create these distractions. Everyone's all mad at each other, and they shouldn't be. And so I look at it all and I go, with how much they've changed what they've said, they have to know what they're doing. They have to know how bad this is. So then I go, either they've let it go on so long, they're afraid of stopping, or there is a real motive to it. And, I like to consider these things. And one of my guests that I've had on quite a few times recently, his name is Gregory Mannarino, and he says they will not stop until they own anything. That the goal of the real government is the global central banking system, and their job is to buy everything, complete the wealth transfer, which is the reset, and then they'll let it go. What do you think about that?
I'm not quite as cynical. I think everything, what do they say? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think it probably started out with good intentions. I think, as I said, we kind of have this Keynesian monetary system, and that's what's taught to all the people that major in economics coming in through college. And so we have generations that's all they've learned, and they learn this financial engineering. And I think there are definitely some evil people in the world. Don't get me wrong, but I think the people at the Fed, I think they're just trying to do the best that they can, knowing that they're damned if they do, damned if they don't, right? If they pull back now, the whole system crashes. All the baby boomers' retirement is going to be completely wiped out. And talk about civil unrest. Imagine if all the baby boomers can't afford to live anymore. We have all these entitlements, pensions, et cetera, that are not going to be funded. So they can't pull back now, but they probably know that they're just digging a hole deeper. And I guess maybe at night they're going to bed saying a prayer, Hail Mary, like hopefully this thing can grow out of it. That's my guess. I'm not quite as cynical as Mannarino is, maybe, but there are some evil people at the 3-letter NGOs that definitely have that.
So do you think that basically the plan is to keep this going indefinitely, forever, past during my lifetime, unless inflation is so bad that you see, like in many socialist and third world countries, happen in power nations as well, that once people lose trust of the currency, then they make a resolution. What do you think the end game for it, I guess, is another way to say it?
Well, the go till you blow basically means they'll continue this game, but it continues to have diminishing returns. And so they'll go, and so eventually there's no return at all, and they'll just go until it just stops working. So like they'll try to keep the markets propped as long as they can, but eventually it doesn't work. And so that's kind of the go till you blow is what I mean. I know one of our mutual friends, Lynette Zhang, she kind of says that maybe they're just trying to keep it open or propped until they're ready to make the switch, which maybe kind of goes more in with what Manarino's thinking, where it's a little bit more deliberate. I just think they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. I think it's having diminishing returns. They'll try to keep the market propped as long as they possibly can, but eventually it falls apart. When is the hard question? And so again, going back to these three revolutionary cycles converging, political, technological, and financial, I believe it's all happening this decade. I believe at the end of this decade, the world's going to look completely different. I think that I think we'll see the end of the giant nation state, and the end of the giant, central bank, global central banking. I think the world is that different at the end of the decade. And so it's, over the next 5-6 years, we're going to see lots of crazy things. So it's going to happen in that time frame. I know it's a big window, but that's what I'm talking about.
So give us an idea of some of the things that are important to be thinking about, considering I know you're going to be diving into this in depth on your live event about the Fed losing control and how to prepare. But let's kind of bring a full circle here to the conversation.
Yeah. So I think as bad and as scary as this sounds, I have great hope. And so I believe on the other side of this is great opportunity, great hope, great prosperity for everybody. So that being said, there's great hope. The next decade isn't looking super good. And it's going to be very rough, right? As we see one system die and another system be born. And again, go back through thousands of years of history and you can just see this over and over. So the goal for us is to figure out how do we, get through this transition period, without being harmed too bad, or even better, how do we come out ahead on this? And so when anything big changes, the people that are paying attention and get the early jump are the ones that come out ahead. And so that's our opportunity if we can navigate this correctly. As you said, we'll get into some more concrete ways. But I think one of the big ways, if I start really high, is people need to start thinking about things not priced in currency, but as in purchasing power. So one problem is that everybody's looking at asset prices in their local currency, or maybe just in US dollars, because US dollars is the reserve currency of the world. And so home prices have never been higher in US dollars, and gold's never been higher in US dollars, and all these things. And I would say home prices have never been higher. Are home prices expensive or cheap? And I would say expensive or cheap compared to what? In dollars, they're very high. But compared to other assets, they're way down. So for example, 1970, the year before we came off the gold standard, the median home price in the United States was 646 ounces of gold. Today, it's 194. So are home prices cheap or expensive? Well, in dollars, they're expensive. In gold, they're very cheap. In oil, it was 6,700 barrels of oil. Today, it's 4,600 barrels of oil. So are home prices expensive or cheap? Well, in dollars, they're expensive. In oil, it's cheap. And the reason why you have to think like that is because if we go back to Germany, when the Weimar Republic blew up, we saw hyperinflation. There's a book titled When Money Dies. Great book. And it really, really talks about this. And what happened is in Germany, everyone thought they were getting rich. My home has never been worth this much. My gold's never been worth this much. I'm selling it now at the top of the market before it crashes back down. So they did. So they sold all their assets at record high prices and got rich. And they owned no assets and owned currency that then became worthless. And as a matter of fact, it became so worthless that they were burning it in their fireplaces in place of wood because it was actually worth less than wood. And so we need to reframe our mind. If all we're looking is at the US dollar valuation of things, we're completely missing what's really going on in the market. And so for us, the goal is to protect or even grow our purchasing power through this period.
On the protect or grow your purchasing power, one thing that I've been thinking about recently is how them talking about inflation the way they do. One of the other ways that it's pretty sinister for the average person is because if they tell you inflation's 3%, but it's really 15%, Unless your income is rising 15% per year, which most people's isn't, it pretty much stays more or less at the same level. Maybe you get a bonus that matches the government's CPI level.
Right.
But if inflation was 15% and you got a 2% year over year inflation increase, you're technically down 13%. And if you compounded that for 5 years, you can see how people could get really screwed. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about is that, everyone's got to decide for themselves what they think inflation's at. Not just for hypothetical conversations about the Federal Reserve, but because your own financial goals need to be adjusted accordingly. Otherwise, you're falling into quicksand without knowing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So you need to be, your money needs to be growing faster than the rate of inflation. So you're absolutely right. If they increase the money supply by 30%, then 30% is inflation. Now, homes obviously went up more than that, as we've discussed already. Gas has as well, but 30% is probably more like the real number.
Wow.
And so at the end of the day, everything is a trade, right? So I'm trading US dollars for a home, or I'm trading rice for a home, or I'm trading oil for gold. And so where you store your wealth, where you store your value matters. And so back to kind of some of those examples, homes priced in rice were 43,000 pounds of rice. Today it's 27,000 pounds of rice.
Huh.
So holding rice was much better than holding oil.
That's interesting.
And it was actually, gold was a little bit better than rice, but rice was better than oil. So where you hold your wealth matters. Now, in Bitcoin, we can't go back that far, but it was 773,000 Bitcoin in 2010. Today, it's 10 Bitcoin.
773 in 2010?
773,000.
Oh, okay. 1,000. I'm sorry.
To 10. And so where you hold your wealth matters. And so when you're looking at your investments, where I've built my whole career on money goes where it's treated best. So I'm always thinking about that when I put my money. Where is it treated best, both from a risk perspective, but also from a return perspective? And then breaking that money up into different areas. And basically you're betting, which one is going to maintain my purchasing power better than something else.
Powerful. So for everyone listening, if you enjoyed today's conversation with Mr. Mark Moss, make sure you hit the like button on this video, subscribe, bell notification, give us a comment down below. Let us know one thing you learned from today's episode. Right there down below, you're going to see the link to sign up for free to Mark's event about how the Fed is losing control, and in depth, the best ways that you can prepare yourself, diving more into the latter half of this conversation we've now been discussing. That's the first comment pinned, and it's in the description right there down below. Mark, any final words?
No, man, we've covered so much. And I guess what I would say is, again, I know it's scary. It sounds daunting, but there is hope. There is hope on the other side. And so I think we can use this opportunity to our advantage. We can come out ahead, and there's great hope on the other side. Unfortunately, for people that aren't paying attention, aren't caught up on what's going on, it's not going to work out good for them. And I don't take any joy in that. But for people that are paying attention and do take advantage of this, it should come out really good. So a message of hope, not of fear.
So thanks for watching today's episode. Be sure to sign up to Mark's event right there down below. Give us a comment right there down below to help out that good old fashioned YouTube algorithm. And we want to thank Mark for coming on today, and we'll see you next time.